Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a quick update on the markets. Nigeria's main index rebounded rather strongly today, up nearly 2% in today's session. Dangote Cement, Nestle, FBN, they all closed over 6% higher. Trading volumes on FBN, in fact, today were at around 4 times as high as a 15-day moving average. There was a rather curious decision from Kenya's government as well today, a move to review power purchase agreements between the dominant distribution firm, Kenya Power, and privately owned thermal power plants, with a view to slashing power costs, at least to consumers, to around 14.5 US cents per kilowatt hour. But exactly how Kenya Power is supposed to weather that revenue cut, that bit is still unclear. Here's what's coming up tonight. Zimbabwe cracks down on illegal forex traders. The EU's General Court annuls Moroccan trade deals over the disputed Western Sahara region. And China is set to increase coal imports in order to ensure adequate power supply. Our starting point at this hour is in Zimbabwe. The central bank over there has ordered banks to freeze accounts held by 30 different individuals for at least 2 years, effectively keeping them out of the system, the financial system, for the next 24 months. These individuals are being accused by the RBZ of promoting and facilitating illegal foreign currency trading. Now, the Southern African country has struggled for years now with acute foreign exchange shortages, and it only reintroduced its own currency, the Zimbabwean dollar, in 2019, effectively ending a decade of dollarization. But the local currency has been losing its value steadily. Now trades on the black market at premiums of up to 100% of its official rate of 86 or 87 Zimbabwean dollars to the greenback. The RBZ Governor, John Mangodia, published a list of names that he alleges are using social media platforms and mobile telecommunication services to facilitate illegal currency trading and, in his view, money laundering. Over in East Africa, Kenya's central bank governor, Patrick Njoroge, says he expects that economic growth will rebound in 2021. Now, the growth will be spurred by the continued reopening of the services sector, a recovery in manufacturing, and stronger global demand, too, for some of the things that Kenya exports. However, that growth could be curtailed by the impact of drought on the agricultural sector. Dr. Njoroge told a virtual news conference that growth this year will be around 6.1% and 5.6% in 2022. Last year's economic contraction of 0.3% was limited in part by policy responses that kept economic output from contracting even more. Earlier on Tuesday, Kenya Central Bank held its benchmark lending rate essentially unchanged at 7%, with its monetary policy committee saying it had taken note of the emerging local and global inflationary pressure. Up north in Egypt, authorities there are saying they will introduce a capital gains tax on shares on the local stock market with effect from the 1st of January 2022. Now, the tax, to be clear, was ratified already way back in 2015, but its implementation has been pushed back time and time again, partly due to investor concerns about the stock market's viability, but also lately due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's CGTN's Yasser Kim with the details from Cairo.
The capital gains tax is a 10% levy on the annual portfolio gains by local investors in the Egyptian Stock Exchange. Foreigners are, however, exempted from the levy. The tax, postponed since 2015, targets the retail segment, which accounts for 80% of the market. But most investors are not happy with this introduction.
We have a very difficult situation of very low market capitalization. If we have a market capitalization of 600 or 720 billion, and we have very few listed companies in the stock market. We have around 216 listed companies, and we have the threat of being delisted from the Morgan Stanley Consumer Index. We were looking more at in some measures to encourage people to list on the stock exchange and to be more attractive to foreign investors and to not lose our advantage or our competitiveness against countries and regions, stock markets in the region around us.
The government says the tax is overdue and maintains taxes are an important source of revenue to to cover costs of the economic program aimed at maintaining strong economic growth rates and combat the effects of the coronavirus pandemic.
We recorded an exit of $20 billion in 6 or 7 weeks during the pandemic, and we had to make up for it, especially after tourism inflows stopped. Secondly, there were concerns of a drop in remittances from expatriates. Thirdly, there was huge instability in international trade, so exports dropped because the markets closed abroad, and so the foreign currency income nosedived.
However, some experts believe authorities should implement a different approach.
If we're trying to look at how to encourage the stock market, we should really remove all taxes on the stock market. Stock markets need stability and need a long-term vision. If we increase the companies listed and the market cap, we will see more foreign direct investment coming into the country. We will see more tax collected. We'll see more companies listing actually on the stock exchange, and we'll end up with more revenues, and we will be able then to achieve our 7% GDP growth that we are looking to.
The International Monetary Fund has, however, commended the North African state's government decision to impose the tax. It remains to be seen how the market will react once the capital gains tax takes effect from the beginning of next year. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
On to West Africa now. Ghana has maintained its key policy rate at 13.5% to try and boost economic growth in the West African states. Now, the central bank cut its lending rate from 14.5% back in May down to 13.5% in June as the economy steadily recovers from the disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. With the details, here's CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai.
Ghana's central bank is keeping the interest rate at 13.5% for the second time since June and is the lowest rate in nearly a decade. Analysts say this will help in the country's economic recovery.
Banks will be able to lend out at a cheaper price to businesses. Businesses can have access to cheaper funds. They can expand their businesses. Once the businesses are growing, there's room for hiring. Of course, digging into the unemployment issue, so they reduce the rate of unemployment.
The central bank says it maintained the lending rate at 13.5% due to increase in the cost of goods and services. Inflation increased from 9.0% in July to 9.7% in August. Ghana's economy has recorded a slower growth than the level before the pandemic, despite a recovery in the services industry. The government says the country's economy grew by 3.9% in the second quarter of this year as compared to 6.9% in 2019. The government had projected the country's economy to grow by 5% by the end of this year, but analysts say that may not be possible.
Looking at all these anticipated expenses as a result of this COVID-19, for me, some of these targets will be very hard to reach, right? It doesn't mean that we should aim for them, but it's going to be difficult.
Still, the central bank says it hopes the success of Ghana's vaccine rollout could further open the economy. The government also plans to rein in spending, so it reduces its fiscal deficit from 13.8%, which was recorded last year, to 10.8% of GDP this year. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
All right, then let's start our company news wrap in the world of liquor. Klipdrift and Savannah maker Distill says there has been satisfactory progress in talks over Heineken's bid to buy the majority of the business. Back in August, Distill CEO Richard Rushton called on investors to have patience and caution following the company's decision to hold off on declaring a dividend amid discussions over the deal. Distill now says that if talks are terminated, it intends to declare a dividend in respect to the financial year ending on the 30th of June 2021. In East Africa, Nation Media Group has wrapped up a share buyback program that started on the 28th of June and wrapped up on the 24th of September. Now, that exercise saw the media firm buy back more than 17.1 million of its ordinary shares at the Nairobi Securities Exchange. It essentially achieved about 82.25% of the target. The media firm was targeting to buy back 10% of its issued shares, equal to around 20.74 million, at a price of 25 shillings per ordinary share. United Airlines has signed a codeshare agreement with South Africa's Airlink, expanding its reach to Southern African destinations including Madagascar, Mozambique and Victoria Falls. The deal adds connections to more than 40 African locations for travellers from the United States, and it's the latest sign of a reopening of international travel in the region in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, Netflix, which has apparently made video games a priority for expansion, has acquired its first game developer for the purchase of Night School Studio. Founded by Sean Crankle and Adam Hines in 2014, Night School Studio is known for its debut title, the supernatural mystery adventure Oxenfree. Netflix plans to make games as part of its subscription with no ads or in-app purchases. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. The EU's General Court has annulled trade deals with Morocco over the disputed Western Sahara region. And Tunisia has gotten its first female prime minister, but what are her priorities for turning around the economy? We'll explore that next.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. Let's head up north now. The European Union's General Court has annulled agriculture and fishing agreements with Morocco over the disputed Western Sahara region. Now, the agreements will be terminated over a certain period to ensure that the EU respects commitments it has already agreed to. The court argued that Morocco did not have the consent of locals affected. It ruled in favour of the Front Polisario independence movement, which had filed a case back in 2019 on behalf of the Sahrawi people who populate the region. The EU and Morocco swiftly issued a joint statement saying they would act to ensure continuity of bilateral trade. A senior Moroccan diplomatic source, however, told Reuters he expected an appeal against what he described as an incoherent ruling. Now, the front has been fighting for the Western Sahara's independence from Morocco. The North African kingdom has occupied the vast, mineral-rich Western Sahara since 1975, and it considers the former Spanish colony to be its southern province. In Tunisia, President Kais Saied has named the country's first female prime minister. Najla Bouden Ramdan's appointment comes nearly 2 months after President Saied suspended parliament and assumed fairly wide-ranging executive powers. Now, Ramdan is a geological engineer. She was responsible for implementing World Bank projects at the Education Ministry. President Saied said her appointment honours women in Tunisia, and he asked her to propose a cabinet in the days to come.
I have decided to ask you to form a new government. This will be the first time in Tunisian history, the first time that a woman leads a government. Until there is an end to these exceptional times. We will work together, God willing, in the future, with great and firm determination to put an end to corruption and to put an end to the chaos that has taken over the state in various institutions, political, economic, social, and others.
Najla Bouden becomes Tunisia's 10th prime minister since 2011. She holds a PhD in geology and is a higher education professor at the National School of Engineering in Tunis. Budin currently serves as the World Bank's Program Implementation Officer at the Ministry of Higher Education. In 2016, she was the head of the Unit of Management by Objectives for the implementation of the Higher Education Reform Project. In 2011, she was appointed the Director General in charge of quality at the Higher Education Department. On July 25th, Tunisian President Kais Saied decided to sack the Prime Minister, freeze Parliament and lift MPs' immunity. More than 2 months later, the new Prime Minister is now in charge of forming the first woman-led government in the history of Tunisia. Najla Bouden and her cabinet will face several economic, social, health and security challenges as they begin working, and will also be tasked with fighting against corruption in the North African nation. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
It's worth pointing out that Tunisia is in the middle of a pretty deep economic crisis. So what exactly are the reforms that can be done, at least in the short run? Let's find out. Fadel Kiboub is an associate professor of economics at Denison University. He joins us now live on the program. Good having the program once again. So what are the immediate economic priorities that you think the Prime Minister can credibly tackle given the current political crisis in Tunisia?
Well, thank you again for having me on the show. This is a very good question. First of all, it's very important to say that this is something to be celebrated, to have the first female prime minister appointed to this office, but in the context of a president that has taken the country, outside the constitutional setting. So there is a political crisis, there is a constitutional crisis on top of an economic crisis that's been brewing for a long time. So the immediate economic concerns from the international community's perspective, from the Tunisian perspective, is the rising amount of debt, external debt that Tunisia has, the forthcoming deadlines for negotiating the next installment of loans from the IMF, and the pressure on the Tunisian currency. The exchange rate has been weakening and will probably continue to weaken. And it's important to see the underlying forces behind this economic crisis, which in the case of Tunisia, like many developing countries, has to do with the fact that Tunisia doesn't have any meaningful level of food security, of energy security. These are the underlying forces that will immediately translate into social and political pressure. That is to say, if the value of the dinar continues to weaken, everything that we import, whether it's food, whether it's fuel, whether it's medical equipment, is going to be imported at a higher cost for the consumers, which means one of two things. Either the government doesn't do anything and allows for those prices to transfer onto consumers, which means you could potentially have food riots and other social and political instability, or it's another round of external borrowing, which means going back to the IMF or other international lenders to prop up the value of the dinar temporarily as a band-aid solution. So the immediate concern is inflation and exchange rate.
And that brings me to my next question, because talks with the IMF were suspended back in July when the president made this extraordinary move, suspending parliament, seizing executive power, suspending immunity for MPs. Do you think talks with the IMF can be credibly restarted under current circumstances?
This is a political question. It really depends on the credibility that the prime minister and the president can bring to the table, because the IMF has had a pretty difficult experience with Tunisian governments in the past, in the sense of coming to agreements about austerity measures, about cuts, and then governments, Tunisian prime ministers and governments not really delivering, because it's extremely difficult, extremely painful politically and socially to deliver on those austerity promises. The problem with the austerity policies that the IMF is going to suggest is that not only they're painful, but they're actually temporary band-aid solutions. They don't actually address the root causes of Tunisia's economic problems. For example, you could spend dollars that the IMF would give to the Tunisian government. You can spend them in a sort of band-aid way, or you can spend them in a transformative way, in a way that actually transforms the Tunisian economy and gives it more resilience in these structural areas of weakness, which is food security and energy security primarily. The problem is that for decades, we've been borrowing just to kind of prop up the exchange rate and to continue the same economic system that we've been using since the 1970s, to be honest.
Okay, so the currency, as you mentioned a little earlier, that's lost around 5% of its value against American dollar. Foreign currency reserves are down around 9% or so so far in the year compared to where they were in December. And this political deadlock doesn't seem to have any end in sight. Doesn't this raise the odds of Tunisia having to restructure some of its public debt sooner rather than later?
I think the restructuring is probably going to happen. It's going to take some political negotiations with the IMF and some of Tunisia's lenders. What worries me the most is not the political crisis, so to speak. It's not the transition back to a constitution and a democratic process. Those are important, and I think there are plenty of civil society forces on the grounds pushing for a timeline to deliver on that front. What worries me the most is that both President Kais Saied, his advisors, and probably the new prime minister as well, none of the team that is currently in charge of the country has an alternative vision for economic reforms. It's going to be simply negotiating whatever the IMF is going to propose and trying to find wiggle room within that framework. For me, there is no end in sight to this permanent crisis, because we may wiggle ourselves out of this crisis for the next 2 or 3 months, but structurally we're going to be back in the same spot unless we address the food sovereignty, the food security aspect, unless we address the renewable energy aspect of Tunisia's future, and unless we address some of the other structural industrial problems that we have in Tunisia, the fact that we primarily specialize in assembly line type of manufacturing, which means low value added content of manufacturing, when we depend on higher value added content in terms of capital equipment and intermediate goods. These are very serious structural problems that nobody in the Tunisian government currently, or to be honest, the 9 or 10 other governments we've had since 2011 had seriously considered or seriously addressed. So for me, I don't see a structural solution on the table as we speak. I hope I'm wrong, but I think it's very important to recognize that the choice of the prime minister as somebody who's politically neutral, so to speak, in a very toxic political environment was a good choice, but also it was a strategic choice in the sense that the prime minister had some working relationship with the World Bank and some working relationship with international agencies that give her some credibility to go into these negotiations on an equal footing, so to speak, on an acceptable footing from an international lender's perspective. So that gives us a little bit of hope that there's going to be some favorable negotiation to get us out of the crisis in the next month or two. But immediately after that, we have to have a strategic plan to spend transformative dollars and stop spending Band-Aid dollars that keep us deeper and deeper into this external debt crisis.
Indeed, vital to get out of the fiscal straitjacket, as it were. Fadel Kaboub, Associate Professor of Economics at Denison University, thank you for your time. Now let's head over to Somalia. The completion of a 30-kilometer-long highway linking the capital Mogadishu on the shores of the Indian Ocean to the town of Afgoye is being hailed as a pretty significant infrastructural achievement, even over the last 30 years. Here's CGTN's Wanja Mungai with that story.
This tarmac road connecting Somalia's capital of Mogadishu to Afgoye town is a major infrastructural milestone. It is considered the longest tarmac road project to be completed since the collapse of President Siad Barre's government in 1990.
What has brought about the delay in the construction of this road is the security. We wanted to ensure there's security first, since a lot of people, both locals and foreigners, worked here. A lot of people died during the construction of the road to Afgoye, especially construction workers. The Al-Shabaab militants were opposed to the construction of this road.
Militants are reported to have killed dozens of construction workers since July 2019, when the construction work began. Despite these attacks and other major stumbling blocks, the $200 million project funded by the Qatari Investment Authority eventually succeeded. It's now a great relief for the locals. It links the capital to the agricultural town of Afgoye, northwest of Mogadishu. Before its completion, delays, costly bus fares and insecurity were common challenges. Ali Hassan Omar, a fruit vendor in Mogadishu, is among the jubilant businessmen.
We used to get our vegetables late, but thank God now it arrives within 30 minutes. Initially, we had to wait 2 to 3 hours, or at least 1 hour 30 minutes. The pawpaw used to get spoiled on the way. We thank God that the problem has been solved.
I am very happy about the construction of this road. It is all good for use now. We thank the government. I used to spend 2 to 3 hours to travel to Afgoye. Today, I am very happy. That time has reduced to 20 or at most 30 minutes.
This success story is seen as a boost for a country that has suffered massive economic and infrastructure losses due to a prolonged civil war. Wanjamungai, CGTN.
Uganda has announced that it is scrapping visa fees for South Sudanese travellers. That news has gotten a very warm reception from those who commute regularly between the two neighbours in East Africa. The decision will save travellers about $100 for each round trip, and it's aimed at boosting bilateral cooperation and trade. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet with a view from Juba.
Uganda's Minister of East African Affairs announced that South Sudanese will enter Uganda visa-free starting October 2021. Uganda has given South Sudan 30 days to reciprocate the same for Ugandans entering South Sudan. Visa fees for a South Sudanese entering Uganda is currently $50 each. The same amount is charged for each Ugandan entering into South Sudan. South Sudan's government has said it welcomes the visa fee waiver.
Since the Ugandans have done it, well, then definitely we'll do the same. Like going to Kenya now is free. You are not asked for visa, but your passport will only be stamped and you go. The same thing with going to Rwanda. If you are going to Rwanda now, you don't need any visa. Just be given free at the airport on entry. The same thing if they have accepted, so we will do it.
South Sudan is a host to many Ugandan traders and business people. South Sudan's government says the free movement of people in the East African region will promote people-to-people contact, trade and development. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Now let's move on to the world of aviation. Africa's largest airline, Ethiopian Airlines, is set to recover faster than the other carriers on the continent. According to forecasts by the International Air Transport Association, Ethiopian Airlines is expected to bounce back to pre-pandemic levels in 2023, a year ahead of the rest of the continent. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with the details from Addis.
Africa's largest and most profitable airlines, Ethiopian Airlines, is living up to its name. According to reports from the industry representative, the airline is fast recovering from the hardship caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And compared with the rest of the continent's progress, ET is by far standing in a better position. And what makes this much more interesting is Ethiopian Airlines have achieved success without any government bailout. In its latest analysis, the International Air Transport Association, IATA, says passenger traffic to, from and within Ethiopia in June 2021 was only 30% below the comparable period for 2019. That also represented a 17% improvement between January 2021, which was 47% down on January 2019 and June 2021. Ethiopia's performance in June was well ahead of the negative 66.6% recorded for the African continent compared with 2019. So by and large, Ethiopia's air transport industry is recovering faster than the rest of the continent, and its progress is pegged on a more measured approach to COVID-19 travel restrictions. Passengers' demand now is expected to recover to pre-COVID levels by 2023. Air transport contributed $4.2 billion to Ethiopia's GDP in 2019, and its aviation sector, which directly employed 19,000 people and supported more than 1.3 million jobs across the wider economy. CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
South Africa's largest metropolitan areas are forging ahead with plans to secure their own electricity supply. The country's main power generator, Eskom, has struggled to keep up with demand for more than a decade now. A green light was given from the state to municipalities that gave them a go-ahead to acquire electricity from sources other than Eskom. As CGTN's Julie Shah now reports, the city of Cape Town is taking things a step further. It's planning on building its own renewable energy plants.
Most of South Africa's power is produced from coal. Cape Town is going the greener route by buying clean energy and building its own renewable energy plants.
We're looking at projects of the size between 5 and 20 megawatts in terms of that power range. And we'll be looking at those projects to be embedded directly on our network. And then in the course of the next 6 months, we'll be looking at initiatives to actually procure power from the open market, and that could be anywhere in the country.
Cape Town is one of 3 of the biggest municipalities trying to reduce dependence on the national power grid. The country has long depended on state-run Eskom, which has failed to provide a stable supply.
Eskom currently does not have sufficient capacity to meet not only the existing demand, but also the projected growth in demand, which is important for economic growth. So we think that it's time that municipalities also make a contribution in that space. It also means that local economic opportunities are created, which I think is critical towards the sustainability of cities and towns in this country.
This is a floating solar plant. It is very popular back in Europe. It's being piloted in South Africa and could prove to be a very useful tool for local farmers.
The plant generates electricity to run the farm and saves water.
There's obviously very high demand for electricity in your pack houses and that sort of thing, where the arable land surrounds those areas. So we don't have space for ground mount solar. So everyone has an irrigation reservoir where you've got plenty of space to be able to use for floating solar.
The city, which is also a favorite among tourists, is working hard to cut carbon emissions.
We are moving towards net zero carbon status, and we see ourselves as a responsible corporate citizen. And I think to further that, we're looking at options such as renewable energy, along with other initiatives such as maximizing energy efficiency, particularly within the public space.
Meanwhile, to strengthen the power grid, South Africa is planning a new 2,500 megawatt nuclear plant. Cape Town has the continent's only nuclear site, which was built during the apartheid era and has served most of the city's needs for close to 30 years. Julie Shah, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
All right, and you're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. China is set to increase coal imports in order to ensure there's adequate domestic power supply. And the British Army is now on standby to help tackle fuel shortages in the country.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in Tunisia, the country's president, Kais Saied, has named the country's first female prime minister. Najla Buten Ramdan's appointment comes nearly 2 months after President Saied suspended parliament and assumed wide-ranging executive powers. Ramdan is a geological engineer. She has a doctorate in that, actually. She was responsible for implementing World Bank projects at the Education Ministry. Over in Zimbabwe, the central bank there has ordered banks to freeze accounts held by 30 individuals for 2 years, effectively locking them out of the financial system. They're accused of promoting and facilitating illegal foreign currency trading. Now, the Southern African country has struggled for years now with deeply acute foreign exchange shortages, and it only reintroduced its own domestic currency in 2019, effectively ending a decade of dollarization. France says it will sharply reduce the number of visas granted to citizens of Algeria, Morocco and Tunisia. France has accused the 3 African countries of not doing enough, in its view, to allow illegal immigrants to return to their home countries. President Emmanuel Macron reportedly took the decision a month ago after failed diplomatic talks. France will now halve the number of visas issued to Algerian and Moroccan nationals. And finally, the European Union's General Court has annulled agriculture and fishing agreements with Morocco over the disputed Western Sahara region. That agreement will be terminated over certain periods to ensure that the EU respects commitments it has agreed to. The court argued that Morocco did not have the consent of locals affected. It ruled in favour of the Polisario Front independence movement. That's a run through your headlines. On to Asia now. China's top economic planners issued a series of measures to ensure adequate energy supply in the country and reassure the public about fuel stocks ahead of the winter heating season. This comes after some Chinese provinces suffered some pretty severe electricity outages and power rationing. The National Development and Reform Commission says electricity supply to residents will be a top priority for the central government, and it will take steps to ensure there are enough coal stocks for power generation. The NDRC has urged all power plants in the country to ensure their coal reserves are well above safety levels. Steps will be taken to increase coal imports as well, while urgent deployments would be made from some of the coal mines in the country. The regulator also says it will promote a better pricing system for electricity, essentially letting that price reflect supply and demand conditions as they change to encourage more electricity production. China will also be increasing domestic natural gas production to ensure enough heating supplies are available in the upcoming winter season. That's according to the NDRC. A little more detail on that story. Power outages in northeastern China have left many homes and businesses struggling to cope. It comes as the region is looking to shift away from its heavy reliance on coal towards different energy sources. Yu Yang has more from the city of Shenyang.
China's northeastern province of Liaoning has seen its first blackout in 17 years. The outage has affected businesses and residents in different ways, with many saying the inconvenience was the worst part of it.
We experienced a power outage in the morning. At that time, we could not cook because we had no electricity. We are a bit worried that there will be more power cuts in the coming months.
It's fine for me because I woke up late and I didn't need to use electricity in the morning. I think the only problem of the outage for me is the ice cream in my refrigerator has been melted.
While many businesses struggle, some are prepared for such an eventuality. With the backup plan in place, production can continue as normal.
We have around 1,000 staff in our office building. We have a dual power supply system, which can support our electricity demand when one power supply is cut. All our staff are able to continue their work.
The Liaoning branch of the State Grid China State-owned Electric Utility Corporation explained why some residents in the province were experiencing power outages.
We saw a huge gap between our power supply and usage. That gap could cause the collapse of the local power grid. So in order to ensure the security of the power grid in Liaoning province caused by the electricity gap, we had to cut some power supply in some areas.
Why is there a gap? Well, authorities say it's largely the fault of high energy consumer enterprises, which are using excessive amounts. And that's where their focus will lie in trying to resolve the issue, limiting the energy consumption of factories and also cutting back on outdoor street lighting and landscape lighting. However, the state grid says the high price of coal is another factor in the outages.
This year's electricity consumption in the Liaoning region has increased 10% year on year. Most of the electricity in this season comes from thermal power. However, with coal prices running high, some of the power plants have to slow or cut their output amid high demand.
Meanwhile, looking to limit its dependency on fossil fuels, China is speeding up the construction of a power generation system for new energy resources, such as wind, hydro or solar. Liaoning province is heavily invested in the concept of new energy. It plans for about half of its power generation to come from such resources by 2030. And many enterprises are already trying to reduce their carbon footprint in small but helpful ways.
We have a target of saving 5% of energy every year. To reach that goal, we have taken measures such as recycling steam condensate and utilizing the thermal energy produced by the preheating process of air compressors.
Officials in the northeast region have vowed to ensure residential electricity and avoid power cuts, all while stabilizing the coal supply for the coming winter. Yu Yang, CGTN in Shenyang, Liaoning province.
The British Army standing by to help tackle fuel shortages in the United Kingdom, triggered in part by a wave of panic buying at petrol stations. Forecourts have been running dry as motorists, desperate to fill up their vehicles, wait in long and sometimes very angry queues. Now, the surge in demand in part was triggered by fears a lack of truck drivers will hit supplies. Adding to the misery, petrol prices have hit an 8-year high and the reports of profiteering at some stations. Here's Nicole Johnston with this report.
Tension is running high at petrol stations across the UK. Panic buying has led to a shortage of fuel and stations are running out fast. For some drivers, the frustration is too much.
Chaotic like this, there's traffic everywhere, people fighting, arguing.
It's very high that I have to leave my job and my office just to get a food. That's how high it is.
Who do you blame for this?
Brexit.
I've got a doctor appointment now and I'm still waiting. I'm going to be waiting for like an hour time, you know, which is very upsetting.
From early Tuesday morning, drivers were already lining up for petrol in Norwich, in England's east. But many stations have nothing left to sell. In central London, dozens have closed as they wait for more supplies. The crisis has forced the government to put the army on standby to deliver fuel. 75 military tanker drivers are ready to go, and this number could be doubled. It's also announced a plan to offer temporary visas to 5,000 foreign truck drivers.
The government insists that the UK has enough fuel supplies, but clearly drivers aren't so sure. This line stretches for blocks and people have been waiting here for hours. And the Petrol Retailers Association says that in some parts of the country, up to 90% of pumps are dry.
The trucking industry says part of the problem is a national shortage of drivers. They need an extra 100,000 to deliver fuel and food. Many foreign drivers returned to their home countries during COVID and haven't returned. Others left because of Brexit, and there's a shortage of new recruits.
Brexit, I hear mentioned a lot, and it no doubt will have been a factor. On the other hand, it's actually helped us to change rules to be able to test more drivers more quickly, flexibilities that we've received by coming outside of the EU and being able to change the law.
Now there's concern that the fuel crisis will lead to staff shortages in hospitals and clinics because people can't drive to work. For now, there are fights over fuel and ongoing chaos. Hardly the smooth transition into a post-Brexit world the British government was hoping for. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
Away from fuel shortages onto a political transition, Japan's former foreign minister Fumio Kishida has won the race to lead the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. In a runoff on Wednesday, he defeated Taro Kono, who was widely seen as a frontrunner. Essentially, that means Kishida is very likely to succeed Yoshihide Suga as Prime Minister within days, as the ruling coalition holds a majority in Parliament. Kishida will also lead the LDP into a general election on the 28th of November. And the acceptance speech he promised transformation.
I, Fumio Kishida, have a special skill of listening to people. I am determined to make an effort toward making a more open, liberal democratic party and a bright future for Japan together with you all. I ask for your support and help, and that is all from me.
Okay, so those are the key details, but where's the background? Here's CGTN's Phoebe Amoroso reporting from Tokyo on Fumio Kishida's journey in Japanese politics.
Kishida has long been on the scene and long been seen as a potential successor to become Prime Minister. He was first elected in 1993. He spent nearly 5 years as Foreign Minister. And indeed, last year, when it came to the LDP race after Abe stepped down due to health problems, he was the runner-up compared to Suga. However, analysts say that we should not necessarily see his victory this time round as a vote of confidence, particularly in his leadership, but rather a vote against Taro Kono, who was the main contender. Now, Kono was seen as a bit of a maverick, as a reformist, and he had some views that some of the more traditional conservative lawmakers could not really accept. For example, Kono said that he was in favor of same-sex marriage and for couples to have separate surnames, whereas Kishida has said he'd not quite reached that point, or he would consult on the issue of surnames, so taking a much more cautious stance. Kono, equally, when he was defense minister, unilaterally decided to cancel a missile program, and that did not go down very well. So when it comes to Kishida, he's definitely seen as a safe pair of hands. He's positioning himself very much, as we just heard, as someone who listens to the people and will be working for the people. He's also seen to be tackling income inequality, and he's critiqued what he calls neoliberal policies and says that he's looking forward to making a more equal Japan after years of sitting in the shadows, as it were, waiting for his moment. It might be that his moment has finally come.
On to Dubai now. It's gearing up to host Expo 2020. It's a delayed world fair that officials hope will act as a catalyst for growth. The United Arab Emirates has been pushing through a raft of reforms that are aimed at making the country a lot more attractive for foreign investors. But it's not alone in the Gulf in courting foreign capital. The powerhouse in the region, Saudi Arabia, has also been vying for international business. Jacob Greaves has that report on What's Hot.
50 new economic initiatives to attract $150 billion in foreign direct investment. That's a plan over the next 9 years, announced here by key UAE ministers earlier this month. So far, it's meant planned upgrades in technology and a new visa system to attract skilled workers. Those at early-stage venture fund Shuruk Partners say it could be key for the country's tech sector.
A lot of these tech talent work remotely, and to attract more of these talent to the region, reforms on visas are kind of a necessity to ensure that they can come work from anywhere and choose Dubai or choose UAE in general.
Workers are back in offices across the UAE, with the country forecasting its economy will grow 2.1% in 2021 amid a rebound from the pandemic. But it's not the only Gulf nation looking to become more competitive on the global stage. The United Arab Emirates, and in particular Dubai, has long been seen as the regional hub for attracting talent and business. But Saudi Arabia, the Arab world's largest economy, is trying to change that with its own set of reforms. In July, Riyadh ended tariff exemptions for goods made in the so-called free zones of other Gulf countries. Free zones form a big part of the UAE's pitch to foreign businesses. Saudi imports from the UAE have already fallen 33% in July compared to the previous month. In a perhaps more controversial move, the kingdom has also announced it will stop giving state contracts to companies that base their Middle East headquarters in another regional country. Saudi-backed media giant MBC is among those already deciding to relocate from Dubai. But UAE officials maintain they welcome regional competition.
The economic competitions between states is natural, expected, healthy, and beneficial to everyone. And the EU is a prime example, as it operates as one economic bloc, but still there is major competition among them.
Creative Zone is a company that helps businesses set up and grow in the UAE marketplace. Its CEO suggests it might not be a case of direct competition at this stage, more attracting a different clientele.
I think Saudi Arabia is in a stage now that they're really aiming at the Fortune 500 type of companies. I think the UAE has gone through that process already, and we were built, and a lot of our city was built on attracting the IBMs and the Googles and the Oracles, and we have them already set up in places like Dubai Media City and so on. Now Dubai has been playing another game, which is attracting the wealthy, the entrepreneurs, the SMEs. They've been developing that because that also helps you build your country from the ground up.
Saudi Arabia is undoubtedly trying to court more international business as it moves away from a reliance on oil revenues. With its economic potential, large workforce and domestic market, it's something of a sleeping giant in the region. The question is, can it catch up with the UAE as a regional hub, given the Gulf nation's sizable head start? Jacob Greaves, CGTN in Dubai.
A quick run through commodities, essentially tying into what we've come from with Dubai and the UAE. Brent crude still north of $75 a barrel. Energy prices continue to just rattle markets and stoke inflation worldwide. You essentially could see as much in the embassy statement coming out of Kenya yesterday. They haven't gone past $80 a barrel today, but they're pretty close. Brent futures for November around 0.6% lower at 17.15 GMT, around $78.60 a barrel. Platinum continues its decline as well, down 1.7% today, taking its year-to-date fall close to 11.3%. Here's what's coming up next. Potato farmers in South Africa protesting over the lapse of anti-dumping measures. And the latest from the runways as in-person celebrity-studded Paris Fashion Week gets underway.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Tunis, Cairo, Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. A bit of breaking news coming your way at this point in time. The organizing committee of the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics has announced that Chinese spectators will be allowed at the Olympics. The committee also announced that all WHO-approved COVID-19 vaccines will be accepted at the Games. Beijing 2022 briefed the International Olympic Committee about its planned coronavirus countermeasures today. It says all domestic and international participants and the workforce within a closed-loop management system will be tested daily to keep everyone safe. Now, back to the business of business. To South Africa, potato farmers are up in arms now over a recent lapse in tariffs that were designed to protect the industry from the dumping of products from the EU market. The country's potato sector says without these anti-dumping measures, it's at risk of below-cost frozen French fries flooding the market from countries like Netherlands and Belgium. With that report, here's CGTN's Travis Andrews.
South Africa's potato industry is an important job creator in the agricultural sector, which employs over 45,000 seasonal and permanent workers. The industry, though, believes these jobs are at risk due to the lapse of tariffs protecting it from dumping. The EU market is of particular concern, and the dumping of frozen French fries the product of threat.
It is of concern to us. We have managed to, or we were under protection for a substantial period of time already, and it proved to be beneficial to the potato community in South Africa as well. So currently, what we need to do is to try to replace or put back those type of tariff protection that we used to have as soon as possible.
The lack of protection means that imported potato products can be priced below locally sourced ones. The dumping is usually as a result of excesses in the outsourced market, which can benefit and harm consumers.
Due to bilateral agreement, we ought to take some of that excess, and the excess means do some good in South Africa also, in terms of the fact that it may lower prices. But if those prices are lowered to the detriment of the farmers, then it's not a good thing.
While the sector contributes over $500 million to the national GDP, the dumping of products could have an overall ripple effect on livelihoods.
If you're a seasonal producer, you've got 6 months in the market, it's not a very good thing to try to turn around whatever you're doing production in a very short period of time. So we need to get consistency and to reduce volatility. And unfortunately, imports can happen in a very varying way in terms of volumes and prices, which can have a detrimental impact to our consistency in terms of delivery and price as well.
According to industry stakeholders, South Africa has long been a prime destination for the dumping of frozen processed potato products. Now, without the anti-dumping tariffs, the cost price squeeze could deter many local producers from entering the market, and this could even lead to a market shortfall in the future. News, CGTN, Cape Town.
We're going to take that breaking news once again before we jump into the currencies. The organizing committee of the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics has announced that Chinese spectators will be allowed at the event. The committee also announced that all WHO-approved COVID-19 vaccines will be accepted at the event. Beijing 2022 briefed the International Olympic Committee about its planned coronavirus countermeasures. Today, it said all domestic and international participants and the workforce within that closed-loop management system will be tested on a daily basis to keep everyone safe. All right, then a quick run through the currencies as we wrap up the program. The e-Naira's rollout is now just, 48 hours away? But the fiat Naira, in contrast to the central bank digital currency to come, that continues to slip against the American dollar. This, remember, is on the foreign market. The session low today was 413.57. It wasn't the only one to slip, however. It seems to be a bit of a trend with a lot of our frontier currencies. The Kenyan shilling, the South African rand, they also slipped. 110.50 for the East African currency and 15.21 for the South African rand. That's it for your currencies in this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. Many ways to get your feedback back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.